Welcome to episode 25 of Radio Omnicore. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, and you're listening to the show that is guaranteed to teach you something useful and introduce you to a dynamic and interesting guest. Today in studio, we have the distinct pleasure of hosting Professor Freddie Crous. He is currently the head of Department of Industrial Psychology and People Management at the University of Johannesburg, and is well known for his contributions to positive industrial psychology in general and in particular for applying appreciative inquiry in his personal life, teaching, research and consulting. So welcome, Professor Freddie. It's wonderful to have you in studio with us. We know that you are very busy and always accommodating. And Hilton's back in studio over there in the corner.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
So, Freddie, why don't you just start off by just giving us a little bit about yourself? Obviously, there's lots to introduce you with, but maybe for the listeners, high level, who's Freddie?
Let me think. I'm an academic, and I'm at the University of Johannesburg. At present, I'm the HOD of the Department of Industrial Psychology and People Management. I've been in that position in an acting capacity for 2 years, but I've been appointed now for the next 3 years. So that's as far as my work is concerned. I'm in that sort of position, making me less of an academic and more of a manager, if you want to. I've met somebody who was HOD at a department at American University, and she said to me, "Good luck to you, because trying to manage academics is like herding cats." But I must say, I've got fantastic colleagues, both on in our support system, but also fellow academics. So I don't really have a problem. And apart from that, I'm married. I don't have children. I became ill just before we got married. My kidneys failed, and I had to go through first dialysis, a transplant, all of that, which changed my life dramatically. And that made me focus on different things. In the sense that as an industrial psychologist, we, like all psychologists, we tend to work with pathology in a system, be it an individual or a group or in a team or an organization, and that became more and more difficult for me, because the funny thing is, when I went through this experience, was that I experienced it as a growth experience. It's not something that I did; it just happened to me. So I'm fortunate that, and way back then, this is in the early 90s. That's before positive psychology and all that. I didn't know why I was not distressed or not anxious going through this process. So I was fortunate that I went through a process of post-traumatic growth, right, and not post-traumatic stress. So that, I think, made me realize that one has to be appreciative of life. And that's maybe why I became interested in appreciative inquiry.
And I think maybe to help us understand it, because we're going to talk a lot about appreciative inquiry today, but for the average person out there who's never heard of this methodology, what actually is it?
All right, so I was also unsure, and I tell you, maybe I should tell my story. So because of this experience I had, I found it difficult to go into a system and say, what are the problems? We need to solve it, that sort of way. So then I was at a conference in Berlin. At every 4 years, psychologists meet from all over the world in a big city, and this was Berlin, 6,000. And I said to myself, well, amongst these 6,000 psychologists, there must be somebody who can maybe help me to move away from a problem-focused approach to something else, more healthy. Because I found it difficult to frame everything as a problem, because for me, all of a sudden, and maybe it's unusual, it's maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but for me, it is. I was sort of in awe of life itself, in the midst of my trauma, because it was not only the dialysis for 8 months and the transplant, but because of the immunosuppressants, I also developed cancer.
Sure.
And the funny thing is, I never experienced all these life-threatening diseases as traumatic. But in any case, so then I went to listen to Ken Gergen, of course, who is the thought leader of, if you want to, social constructionism. And I went to him afterwards and I say, well, I'm an industrial psychologist. We tend to be very quantitative in the way we approach things. How would you make sense, or how can I apply social constructionism in the workplace? And he said to me, don't you know about appreciative inquiry? And I said, no. And he said, well, there's this person, David Cooperrider, at Case Western Reserve University. He's the person who can help you. So why don't you approach him? And I mailed him. And he said to me, he didn't respond in the beginning, but then I got this mail and he said, come and do my course. So I went to Cleveland, where I did the appreciative inquiry training. And here I discovered that David went through the same process where he, as a PhD student, was asked to do a organization development and change exercise at a hospital, at the Cleveland Clinic. And he had the same thing. He stepped into the ward and he started to look for what is wrong in the system. Right, there is nurse X who is rude to the patient. You make a note of that. The doctor is in turn rude to the. But he also observed, as he was going about, the good things that were happening. But given the nature of his study, of his action research project, what is wrong with the human side of the Cleveland Clinic? He could not focus on what was healthy in the system. So he had to negate that. And to him, that became problematic because for him personally, because he read the book of Albert Schweitzer, his autobiography, and Schweitzer's idea that one should revere all life struck him, and he said to himself, am I revering life? Am I giving life with what I'm doing at present? He said, no, because I'm just looking for what is wrong all the time and feed that back into the system. People start to see me as a threat. They don't see me as somebody who really, and that's how he then, and I think it was because of his wife's input. She said, well, she's an artist. And maybe, so when he wanted to resign from the project, his supervisor said to him, well, is there not maybe another approach? And he said, well, I can continue with this on the condition that I do an appreciative inquiry. And that's, so he coined it as that. So the board allowed him to go ahead with his project on the basis that he will then look for what is strong and successful and healthy in the organization, amplify that, and then get people that are maybe not doing well in the system to learn from the systems in the hospital that are performing optimally. So it becomes then a collaborative kind of approach, and I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, because appreciative inquiry has a very strong South, or let's say African basis, and I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later.
It'll be interesting to hear that. I mean, maybe just for the audience, in a way, positive psychology is really developed, I guess, in the last 20 years, mostly. And psychology always used to be very problem-focused about what's going wrong. And appreciative inquiry was one of the answers to that. And and mostly in organizations.
Yes, absolutely.
On the therapeutic side, some of the early breakthroughs in positive therapy were like the solution-focused therapy of Steve DeShazer and Kim Berg. And they all kind of shift the focus from not what is broken, but what is working and what can we build on that is working. And those ideas, I think, were well established probably by like the early 1990s, right? I mean, is that fair? And I'm wondering how appreciative inquiry has evolved over the time, because now there's a lot more, I guess, emphasis in that world and on the positive psychology part.
Yes. So David never thought that he was going to change.
Right.
OD, and for him it was just an academic exercise. And for his PhD, he then studied the relationship between appreciative inquiry and innovation.
Wow.
And if you think of Barbara Fredrickson's theory that positive emotions open one's thinking and action, even your action repertoire is broadened. So it broadens. Positive emotions broaden one's thinking and actions. It also makes you, it's also, it says broaden and build. It builds you, it makes you stronger. So, and that sort of corroborated David's idea, I would think. Her theory, for the first time, there was a theory to say what you're doing is in fact, it's maybe I should now come back to South Africa. Mm-hmm. So some people then saw the opportunity, some practitioners saw the opportunity, of appreciative inquiry to make that actionable, and as another approach to the problem-focused one. So 2 women came to Africa, to a village close to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. It was, I would think, just after internal war in Zimbabwe on the western side. It was very dry. There was a drought. So they visited this village where there were only women left. No men, women with children. So normally when the Americans and the Europeans come to do intervention, it's we've got the answers, we're going to tell you what to do, and we're going to guide you, and that sort of thing. And they said, no, let's listen to what David said, but how to make appreciative inquiry sort of doable, and how can we make it understandable for these people in the village. And they came up with a simple sort of approach. They said there are 4 Ds. Firstly, we have to discover what is well in the system. So they analyzed what David did and they made it. So the first D is we have to discover. Once we discover what is healthy in the system, then the system will be able to dream about a future, to envision, because as Fredrickson said, if you start to see that you've got, let's say, agency, then you can, but of course this is an action research approach. So we move to action. So if you then are able to dream about the future, so positive images of the future will make you start to act positively. So, but you have to design for that.
Right.
So the third D then is design, but then to design, and then the end, of course, they had this word. You have to deliver on this design, and later it was changed to it must become your destiny almost.
Okay.
And this is what they did with the women. So they asked the women in the discovery phase, tell us, and then they observed that the kids were healthy, and they said, tell us your stories. How come, in spite of the drought, in spite of the war, in spite of not having any men to support you, how come your kids are healthy? So these women started to tell their stories, and this is the social construction. They told their stories to each other, and then they started to see, but we do have agency. We actually not fine, but I mean we are we're strong, and they started to build. To dream about the future. How can they change the village, and but also then how to partner with others outside of the village, be it the government, be it maybe the Americans, and then to design themselves what they want for the future, and they started to implement that.
So one of the criticisms that I've heard is that although it's wonderful, it builds on the positive, that there is a sense of ignoring the real elephant in the room and the challenges. Yeah. So working with, for example, a new team where there's leadership issues, they don't want to listen to the new leader because there's lots of unfinished business and drama. Does appreciative inquiry not look into that past and create a future better for that team? And do those things then still sit as a barrier in the team, or how does that work?
So with appreciative inquiry with appreciative inquiry, we've got there are basic questions in the discovery phase. You first ask, tell me about a high point in your life. It's sort of Maslow,
Right.
Tell me about a high point, something exciting that happened in your past, who was involved, all of that. The next one will be, tell me what you value about, let's say, the organization, then your colleagues, the leadership, the team, the customers. So, of course, and you tell them it doesn't. So we do this when we are at our very best. We're not always like that, but when we're at our best, what do you value about? That's the second question. The third one then is, what gives life to your organization? What's your core identity? Without this, you will not be the same. The thing that you value most. So identify that. And then the last one is, tell me about your wishes and hopes for the team or the organization, whatever you are investigating. And that, as let's say the facilitator, that will give you an idea of what the problems are. So if somebody says, my wish is X, Y, and Z, then these are maybe the issues that we have to address, but also then appreciatively, not to amplify that, because that's a problem. If you amplify that, then people start to use that to start to vent, but that those are the issues, and you can build that into your design, how to address those. So it's you are aware of the problems, but you reframe them as maybe opportunities or possibilities for growth. And you may have a question, tell me about a time when things went very bad, and how did you manage to transcend that, to deal with that? So, yes. So it's not to ignore the problem, but to reframe it.
So, I mean, it sounds like there's quite a well-contained methodology that you would enter into. And does that work like in most corporations? You would go in with a kind of set of questions and facilitate these conversations with people in the business. And what happens next? So people are talking about, whatever, all the dreams of the organization, what works well and where they're planning to go. Is there like a implementation after that? Is it deconstructed further?
Yeah. So I would normally meet with whoever asks, with the client is, and it may be the MD or somebody in HR, and they would tell me, what their needs are. And I would say, but tell me exactly what you want. And in my discussion, we will collaborate in coming up with an affirmative topic. So it's a healthy topic, an affirmative one, and around that then you start to build the rest of the appreciative inquiry. So that guides you. So that may be referred to as the 5th D that came in later, to define exactly what we want to do. So out of the affirmative topic, you've got these generic questions, but you may then, given the nature of the topic or even topics, that you then build into so there is an interview guide, because the system and one of the principles, we can talk about the principles underlying appreciative inquiry. One of the principles would be, that came in later, is the principle of the whole. So if you want to change the system, you want to bring in everybody in that system. So if you work maybe with an executive team, make sure that all of them are there. If you want to change the complete organization, then you have to involve everyone. It's not like, let's say, future search, where maybe you bring in certain people, they go out and then they tell the others. You have to experience the process. So, and I've been involved with a mine where 9,000 people were exposed to an appreciative inquiry. But we can talk about that later. But then, back to the question, then you've got, in the discovery, you've got these questions, of course, and you discuss them first with the client. And then people in the system, if you meet with them, they will then interview each other. So it's not me, the facilitator, interviewing the client or clients. They interview each other. They share stories. So tell me about a good time or a best experience you had in our organization. The person will then reflect on that, and they make notes. Then you ask them to come together in smaller groups. They then look for themes that they would like to put forward to the larger group, and in the end you have then 6 themes. So you extract themes from these stories, but they do it. So they do it. It's a iterative process, and in the end you come up with the positive core of the system, be it the team, the organization, or the individual even. So what is your positive core given all these stories? Because that gives you the basis from which to move forward. So given your positive core, let's now look at the dream. What is your dream? And again, you've got some questions. So it's 4 years into the future or 3 years into the future, we are flourishing. How do we look like? Given and inspired by our positive core, what did you do to get to this position of flourishing or thriving or whatever? And they talk about that. So that becomes sort of their dream then, if you want to. And you ask them, what are we doing different and all of that. Because it's so wordy, I normally break, and that's what normally happens. You break then the system or the process by doing something, a skit or to paint something. I nowadays only use newspapers so I tell them a newspaper is very negative in most cases. It's sensational, but I would like you to find positive, uplifting sort of photos or headlines, and let's make a collage. So a collage of our team at its very best. So it's not always like this, but at our very best. So, and that normally they can take back to the office, because they will remember that. Maybe they'll forget about their positive core or that, but they'll remember that, and that can take them back then to the exercise. And then we go into the design phase to say, this is now your dream. what is your value proposition?
Yes.
Given what we've done, what value do we give to our stakeholders? Given what the exercise up to now, that's in the design. So we design a value proposition for the team or the organization or whatever the system is. And from there, we then go into a social design for the whole. So if it is about changing the complete organization, maybe, then you have to say, let's look at maybe leadership, the technical side, whatever, and you can use some models like, let's say, the McKinsey 6Ss or whatever as a guide to design, but then to redo this in a positive way. And then finally, now let's look at the future. How are we going to make this happen? So you have to say person X. So people then can decide, I want to be involved. Given this desire, I would like to be involved maybe in X, Y, or Z, where given my strengths, my interest. And that's also positive about appreciative inquiry, that it's up to the participants to decide where do they want to be involved to bring about positive change. And then the idea why they came up with the idea of maybe to deliver, rather not to deliver, but to make this appreciative inquiry your destiny, if you want to, is to make sure that appreciative inquiry becomes a way of being in the organization. The way that we do our letter, our communication, be it, it has to be appreciative. Everything that we, so the way we communicate, because this idea in social constructionism, as we communicate, so we co-create our futures, or our future. So, and that's sort of the process. But now, sorry, this was a long answer to your question. Some people realize we can use this for coaching, for instance. We can use this for leadership development. We can use this for career development, if you want to. We can use this for marriage enrichment. We can use this for conflict.
And parenting, I guess.
Absolutely. Education. It's very strong in education, but parenting as well. And because it links very well with positive psychology. Remember, this happened alongside the origination of positive psychology, but it now links. I mean, Seligman likes to invite David to teach on his MAP program, for instance, the Masters in Applied Positivity.
Okay. I mean, I wonder if the model fits with most human beings, because generally when you're going in to do some kind of intervention, people are really immersed in what's going wrong. In some way you've got to shift their consciousness around, well, we're not going to focus, you're just blaming the economy or whatever, all the things that are a problem. And you've got to take people, are people resistant to, when you start asking the questions about what's working, are you finding that people can easily go on that journey, or do they want to step backwards and talk about all the things that are a problem?
My experience is that people respect the process. People respect the process, sorry. They don't undermine the process. It happened one or twice for different reasons. One was one case, two very powerful persons, women in this case, who opposed each other, and the ones that I don't want to go this route because I'm annoyed. And of course that is that person's right. So then in this case, maybe appreciative inquiry was not the right approach. But in my experience is that, and I can give you an example. We did appreciative inquiry in a little village in the Southern Cape where a murder was committed. So the perpetrator. So it was a local pub owner who was murdered by one of his workers. It was not the pub owner; it was his wife. So his wife was killed by one of their workers. So there was a lot of tension in this little town, and so they invited me to come and do an appreciative inquiry, and the local journalist who could speak Xhosa, Afrikaans, and English. Somebody stood up and said, "No, I don't want. I'm annoyed. I'm angry." And then he said, "You know what? We've got a lot of time to be angry. Today is special. Today we're going to focus on what is well and healthy in our town, because that's what we want. We cannot go the other route. Justice will take its course, but we have to, as a community, get together again." And everybody respected that. And that is my experience, that people see the opportunity, the rare opportunity. Personally, I don't think that it's. I think it aligns to who we are as human beings. I think and I agree with zoologists that would tell you that the human species is a neotenic species, meaning that we're a youthful species. That we're a species that never grow up. We like to laugh and we're affable. We like to be with other people. We are curious. We're playful, and we like this even at old age. But we allow sometimes, and in most cases, for the dark side, because and the negative to take over. But I think at heart we are not. That's not what we want. I think we are annoyed because the system doesn't allow us to be who we want to be be creative, to be involved with others, to be happy, and yeah.
So in coaching, I think there's an element, as you've pointed out, almost the process of figuring out the way ahead, but giving people feedback around psychometric assessments, say for example, or your 360 assessment or your performance conversation. Yeah. Is there a little bit of brushing over painting over the cracks, what's that saying? Where you're making everything seem like it's polyanderish.
Yeah. So I think that's a trick, to make sure that you don't exploit this, to do exactly that, to ignore what is wrong. But it's how to reframe that. Let's say do a performance appraisal with somebody. We tend to focus only on what is wrong. We skim over what is good about this person, undermining the person's strengths and what that person can contribute. So in when we do these kind of conversations, we focus on those areas where you underperform. And my experience is that many people dislike performance appraisals and the interviews, especially because you don't want to go into conversation where this is what's going to happen. A person may score 9s all the way, 9 out of 10, and then there's one where I'm 2 out of 10,
yes.
And the conversation will be about that.
Exactly.
And so appreciative inquiry is to highlight what are you doing well, but then let's see how can we address, given your. And I sometimes use psychometric tests if it's possible. Let's see what your strengths are, and let's see how we can use your strengths then to deal maybe with those areas where you are not performing as optimally as you want to. But it does not become the focus or the core focus of the conversation. And you can continue with that and see. And there are new ideas like job crafting, for instance. This is your job profile. But let's see how can, given your strengths and your interests, how can we craft your job to deal maybe with the challenges of your job that the management is not going to be able to deal with. You will have to do it, but yeah. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
I mean, I think one of the foundations of appreciative inquiry, the whole social constructionist approach, is that when we talk about a positive reality, we're being very active in creating that reality, right? That's the foundation. Yeah. And that the more we give interpretation to the kind of futures that we want, the more we bring those into existence. And that's a very fundamental premise on why appreciative inquiry might be seen as something that has greater efficacy than a problem-focused one, because when you focus on problems, you bring problems into existence and you amplify problems, as you said. I guess the underlying question is, that sounds brilliant. Does it work in your experience when people have these very positive conversation and mining for strengths?
Yeah.
Does it work? Does it bring those realities into practice?
Yeah, I as they say, one swallow doesn't make a summer. So don't. And some people make the mistake to think, let's do one appreciative inquiry and then things will be fine. No, it has to become a way of being, and so in a way, the system must take that on and really bring that. Into their future,
and almost like a culture.
It must become a culture, absolutely. And I wanted to see, is there an organization like that? And because you find there are not many organizations like that. Because if times become tough, then you go back to the control and all of that. And now that I'm the HOD of the department, I'm challenged with that.
Yes.
But, for instance, you can use appreciative inquiry even in strategy. So there's this idea of a SOAR analysis as opposed to a SWOT analysis. And if you start to bring that in, so we're going to do a SOAR, strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. Right. And you use that, and you weave that into the appreciative inquiry. And I've done that now for the last 2 years in the department. And people start to respect that. And when we do have meetings and somebody... Because some people do undermine, maybe, and I'm not saying in my department, but I've seen that happens. So some people want to derail it because they for different reasons. But there was a company in America that I went to. It's called Green Mountain Coffee. And the owner and also the CEO, it now belongs to somebody else. I suppose he's old and he retired. But he brought in the appreciative inquiry and similar and related sort of methods and theories and whatever and practices into his organization to exactly do that. You would go there will be a room where you can meditate maybe. There, it's the whole thing. Everybody has a share in the organization. So I was at my training in America. The guy that sat next to me was a laborer, because I'm also I'm a laborer, but I'm also a partner in the company, and also I'm also want to be informed by the newest thinking in how to organize the organization for the better. Yeah.
So, Freddie, I'm interested in your take on the politics and the Game of Thrones stuff that goes on in industry, because you're running a team of people as well, but I don't know if the academic environment is a little different, I think, to, say, a corporate environment.
Yes.
There's a lot of, so you've got such a generous spirit. You just come across as, you live this stuff. But not everyone in organizations are sort of very clear of their agendas, and there's lots of politics. How do you coach a senior leader to bring in appreciative inquiry but not be naive that there are people, there's like that, you can become too trusting in the environment.
Yeah. So for me, I see myself as, when I do an appreciative inquiry, that I come there and I can just give, for this period that I'm with them, I can give myself and show them maybe what does it mean to be appreciative. But also to know that it's not a panacea. It's not, you have to be realistic if you want to. But given my experience, that the dark side need not be, you don't have to stay clear of what is wrong and bad in society or in a system, any other system. I like this idea, the book that Nassim Taleb wrote, and the title of the book was, I'm trying to think.
I don't know it.
It's a fascinating...
A local book.
He's not a local guy. He wrote the book, The Black Swan. He became famous for that. And then he wrote Anti-Fragile. Okay. And he would describe, in this book, it's a thick book, but he would describe post-traumatic growth as a form of being anti-fragile, that you almost take on the dark side. You almost... But it's not a threat, but you play with it. So you go out and see that as something that you can play with. Not
Not resist it.
Exactly. Not resist it, but embrace it and play with it.
So would anti-fragile be resilience?
He says no. He doesn't like words like resilience or no. He doesn't like positive psychology, by the way. But
he's negative about positive psychology.
But the idea that you should actually take on and but not resist, you're quite right.
Tell us about the conference you're heading off to in 2 weeks. When are you going?
Yes, it's from the 19th of March to the 22nd. It's the World Appreciative Inquiry Conference. So every 4 years or so, there's an appreciative inquiry where people from all over the world gather, and to discover new ways of applying appreciative inquiry, and maybe new thoughts and new ideas.
And where's it being held?
It's going to be in Nice, in France.
And who on that list are you most excited to go and listen to?
Well, it's always good to listen to David Cooperrider, the person who came up with the idea, and his colleagues at Case Western Reserve is still there. There is a David Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry at Vermont University with some researchers there. They will be there. And there are many people who at other universities who are working with appreciative inquiry both as a research method, but so it's become a research method if you want to. It's not just an action research, but it's how to study the positive if you want to. It's still for many academics a bit problematic, but I've got some PhD students who use appreciative inquiry, but I use it in collaboration, with other methods as well. So it becomes a multi.
Right.
Yeah.
We're a particular fan of one of your students, Dr. Anne Carvello.
Do they, at the end of the conference, say, well, how could we have done that better?
So yes, normally we do an evaluation.
Yes.
So in appreciative inquiry we do evaluation. What did we value about
really?
the week, and of course, what are our wishes and hopes for the next one, given maybe.
And the scientist in me is intrigued, especially you being an academic, of the kind of proven efficacy. I mean, are there studies where they've kind of pegged a appreciative inquiry approach versus maybe a more critical founded approach and found that the one works better than the other? Is there quantitative data? What are you finding?
Yes. So there are some people who are doing exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of one or two of these kinds of studies. But there are lots of cases, of case studies where appreciative inquiry.
It's more qualitative.
But somebody had looked at the progress of appreciative inquiry and how it impacted. But it's predominantly qualitative.
Right. Yeah. And it's difficult to research because you're dealing with case studies. It's hard to kind of have a double-blind study or anything like that. You're really talking about complex research and longitudinal research, probably. Yeah. Yes.
But I'm sure people, it will happen. It will happen.
I would love to know the end of your story with the village that you worked in. What was the result that you got there?
All right, so I'm in Joburg, they're down there. So we did the intervention. The medium or the short-term goal that we had was to alleviate the tension. That happened. So lots of people turned up, and the businessman donated some food. So it was quite a joyful experience. Each person had to draw on a little pebble his or her wish for the future and where they could contribute. So somewhere in this little village there is this heap of pebbles that will remind them. The sad thing is, and this is the problem with maybe the destiny, how to make this your future, is that the people who were really the group that wanted the town to become what it was and even better, got together and they invited some business people to join them because they had this idea. So one of the outcomes was to start a green village, so to make a part of this village green, sustainable. And then they even had an architect there, and then and this is now the important thing, I mentioned the idea of the whole. The people that joined them were not part of this exercise. They saw this as a business opportunity, and then they captured that idea. And eventually it failed because the community then did not participate because they saw this now as a business opportunity and not sort of a social thing that happened. And of course, business can be part of that. The tension was alleviated, and I'm sure for me, given those pebbles, if only 10% of those promises or wishes came to fruition, I think they would have benefited in some way or the other.
So I think the people that we deal with in corporates, I'm just thinking around the financials, and there's just a much harder expectation of consultants going in. How you sell this idea, that it doesn't come across as too fluffy or sort of almost new agey to some people. I mean, I love that. I buy into it big time, but I'm just I'm picturing myself in a very well-known bank in Joburg explaining this. How would they...
So I will tell them it's a strength-based approach. So it's not, it's nothing. It is about the strengths and the possibilities of your organization, and we're going to focus on that. So it's to build, not to.
I mean, I think there's a real mind shift that happens, and I know from my own experience in teaching solution-focused therapy approaches, we used to get like a room full of students who were really exceptionally well-versed in problem-focused approaches, and we would show a snip from the movie American Beauty, where this family's falling apart and there's lots of conflict. And you could just, if you looked at that movie, you would just see like a lot of chaos and dysfunction going on there. And we would say to everyone, explain this in terms of the models you know. Explain this in terms of a psychodynamic model or a TA model. Yeah. And everyone would put on their kind of problem-focused lenses and come up with like amazing themes and theories that really fitted those models. Yeah. You could take that family apart. Yeah. And then we'd say, okay, let's stop the bus over here. And can everybody start looking at things that might be working in this family? And then like people would start finding things, well, you know, they were still having dinner together and that person came up with a good idea and there still seems to be hope. And suddenly you would have this like avalanche of perspective of what was functioning well. Yeah. And that mind shift was like the lights went on in these students of, you know, whatever I'm looking for, I'm going to find. And if you go into an organization, look for problems, you're going to find them by the mountainful. They're really there, and you can choose to focus on those things and how to fix them, and that can be your journey. But if you start looking for what's working and build on those strengths, you're looking at the same data with just a very, very different lens, and that opens up minds about how to build on what is working rather than let's go fix what is broken. And I do think that there's a shift that can happen that can take people on that journey. And with those students, it certainly seemed to be like an eye-opener. And I guess to your question is, you know, you could talk to the accountants about all the numbers that maybe are not adding up and the low sales and those kind of things, but you could focus on the sales that have worked. And how did we nail that client so that it suddenly was a great client, and learn from those journeys rather than the ones where things are falling apart?
Absolutely. Yeah.
My question that sits with me at the moment is evolutionary psychology says that often we're focusing on the problems because we really need to attend to them because we need to survive. So is it sort of is this why we always perseverate on the problems? Because it's partly our survival, and is that why it's so hard for us to put that problem down and say, okay, but it's so sunny today, but meantime, you're worried you're going to get robbed at the robot or whatever.
Well, I think from an evolutionary point of view, it is the case that we have to survive. So the negative is always stronger. I think Fredrickson, with their research, later became controversial, but the idea that the negative is always stronger, but that's why you have to invest in the positive to counteract.
Right.
So for every one negative, you need at least 3, maybe 4, 5, 6 positives in the system. So you have to go and look for what is strong and healthy to remind you all the time. But yes, we can cope because we do have these resources within ourselves. So that's maybe an approach to deal with it. But also, I look at evolutionary psychology from a different perspective. This idea that we are a neotenic species, that we want to rise, we're an originative species. The idea that we are bipedal, walking upright, we internalize that. So on a psychological level, we want to be up. If I'm up, I'm healthy, I'm well. If I'm down, I'm sick or not well or whatever, depressed.
In the South African context, with our current leadership, could we say there's a crisis or change?
You could say there's a political crisis for sure.
I'm just wondering, when you turn on the radio and you listen to all of this stuff, how would Appreciative Inquiry be able to shift South Africa's energy?
We have to be annoyed with what happened in many cases if we listen to what's coming out. So, and it does not mean that you have to not be annoyed. I think because it could have been different, and it can be different, and that's why we have to work together. Given our history, there are examples where this is a big challenge to us, but how to almost deal with this unsurmountable,
I guess I think my answer to that would be that Appreciative Inquiry also has a place And it's not always the right intervention. If your house is burning down,
yes, of course, yeah.
you don't want to be sitting there thinking, wow, I'm getting light from the fire and it's warm. I mean, you want to say, put out the fire. And in a crisis, you probably don't want to be saying, okay, so what's working? It's like, let's sort out the crisis and then build for the future using a different approach. Hey, I mean, is that fair?
Absolutely. But I do think, is it Apollo 13 when they were in trouble?
Yeah, absolutely.
They had to look for what can we take? What is going to work?
Right.
Oh, yes, we can change that thing to make it work, to help us. So you sometimes, even in a crisis, you have to open up your eyes for what is going to help us.
Right. What are the resources we have?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So one thing that really sits with me from the beginning of the interview was how you spoke about your all for life and, your challenges that you dealt with your health. What are the techniques and approaches that you use for work-life integration, if that is a thing? I know you're very busy. And does that still sit with you, your awe of life? And,
When I was ill, I was appreciative of life. When I became healthy again, I took life for granted.
Right.
So when I got cancer, and that was because of the immunosuppressants I took, because my brother who gave me the kidney and I are only 50% compatible, I had to find something to remind me, not to forget that life is worth living well. So I've got a little logo that I designed that I've got, and I'm also an art collector. So I try to collect art to remind me of what is healthy and strong. It's contemporary. It's not always pretty and colourful, but the art that I collect in my house and in my office also is there to remind me.
Right.
I think one more question, if I may ask, and that's just your view of the industrial psychology industry as a whole and perhaps the career changes that are happening with the youth.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that there's a big change in the world of work, but the degrees haven't yet followed up with that change, and it's quite confusing. We see a lot of graduates coming out not finding work, not really being happy with what they've studied. What have you noticed over the time that you've been there? Are there indeed changes happening?
I think so. At our university, our VC, our Vice Chancellor, he is very much focused on the fourth industrial revolution. And but I also like about him, he studied, funny enough, also when he did his master at Case Western Reserve University. That's where he did his master's degree in engineering. And what he liked about the American system is that, yes, you study engineering, but you have to take some modules from humanities, other disciplines. So he's trying to make sure that we expose students, that's his wish, to other disciplines. If you study a certain profession, also make sure that you are so that you can become innovative, and if things are not going that easy, that you can maybe become creative and whatever. So I think that's maybe what I like about him. So that is the route that we most probably going to follow. But academia is very difficult to change.
Right.
I've come to realize that it's very, very difficult, because academics by nature, they've got their focus areas and they don't want that to be threatened and to open up. So it is.
I mean, I guess one of the things I've noticed with industrial psychology interns who come over here is that they've certainly got a lot of knowledge. The one area where I find that we have to do a lot of work is in kind of their people communication skills. When I come out of a counselling background, so there was like a lot of emphasis on how to facilitate and have conversations and do them in a way where you don't impose a view and all that kind of stuff. And the industrial psychologists, that doesn't seem to be an emphasis. They often come in completely naive around how to facilitate those conversations. I'm trusting you to fix that, since you're now head of department.
We do have a counselling psychologist in our department who's doing exactly that, but you've got only so much time, and that's the challenge.
Well, it's what you prioritize, absolutely. Sure. Okay.
So it's been very inspirational listening to you, both from a personal perspective and just your commitment and passion to appreciative inquiry. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And there's still so much that we could actually ask. But
I think it's been very enlightening, Freddie. So thanks so much for coming through and sharing the latest thinking.
Thank you.
And I think you should give Freddie a tour of our quiet room.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, quiet room.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
In this very problem-focused world we find ourselves in, appreciative inquiry and the invitational, tentative, generous method of teaching and learning seems more important than ever. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and comment, and check out our website www.omnicore.co.za for our blog and previous episodes. And thank you so much to William Uren, our producer.